Guidehouse. We work side by side with our commercial and public sector clients to address their most important challenges by advancing strategic thinking and building trust in society. We are the leading consulting firm serving defense, energy, sustainability and infrastructure, financial services, healthcare, life sciences, national security, along with federal, state, and local government agencies. Guidehouse combines leading expertise to deliver world-class capabilities in management, technology, and risk consulting. The future of consulting lives here.
Hello, I'm Tom Kuhn, President of the Edison Electric Institute, and welcome to EEI 2020, a virtual leadership summit. This is EEI's first major virtual conference, and we're excited about it. Of course, it wasn't our first choice. It was a heart-wrenching decision to cancel our convention in June for the first time in almost 90 years. But like all of you, we are learning new things and adjusting to that new normal, which may be with us for a while. That's why we're thrilled to see everyone here in the virtual arena. Of course, we can't wait to welcome you again next June in Las Vegas. But for now, we have a top-flight program in store for you. And I want to thank the generous sponsors of our opening session, Oracle Utilities and Guidehouse. Please visit the sponsor wall in our virtual conference center to check out some of the great things they're doing. Fittingly, our opening keynote today will focus in detail on the coronavirus pandemic and how electric power companies are responding. Keeping the lights on and the gas flowing is always job one for us, but the public health crisis does create some additional challenges. To get started, I want to introduce EEI's new chairman, Ben Fowke, whose day job is chairman and CEO of Xcel Energy. Back in June, Ben was elected chairman by his peers on the EEI Board of Directors, which is a huge honor and a tribute to his leadership. Ben has some big plans for EEI in the coming year, starting with leading our electric companies through the pandemic recovery. So with that, let me turn it over to EEI Chairman Ben Fowke.
Tom, thanks for those comments, and I'm indeed honored to serve as the chairman of EEI, particularly at this unparalleled moment in history. Now, as I reflect on the past several months, I am so proud of the way this industry demonstrates leadership and confronts challenges, from the COVID-19 pandemic that we will discuss today to a series of catastrophic and historic storms and wildfires that have already impacted all parts of the country. In Louisiana right now, companies and crews continue their work to restore power following Hurricane Laura. In the hardest hit areas, this devastating storm destroyed major portions of the transmission system, requiring a complete rebuild of the system. As always, EEI member companies have come together with a singular purpose: to restore power and hope to customers and communities in the storm's path. Our virtual summit will look at all the big issues and challenges facing our industry and our nation. And the COVID-19 pandemic sits at or near the top of that list. This global health crisis has touched nearly every aspect of our lives and our businesses. The loss of human life is heartbreaking, and the mounting toll on the U.S. economy, on families and businesses, large and small, is staggering. In our industry, there is no margin for error. Electric companies are committed to serving our customers and our communities in good times and bad, and this crisis has only reinforced the value of electricity in our society. As we've demonstrated repeatedly throughout our responses to storms and other events, it's when disasters hit that our industry's deep commitment to service truly shines. I am truly proud of how quickly we mobilized to respond to this pandemic. And I know that all of our companies continue to work around the clock to keep the lights on and to protect the health and safety of our employees. While our attention is focused on the pandemic, we do not have the luxury of looking away from other priorities. That is the nature of our conversation here this afternoon, and it is one of the major initiatives that I've identified to address during my year as EEI Chairman. So how does our industry navigate the ongoing COVID-19 response and play a pivotal role in the pandemic recovery while also advancing our long-term goals? We're fortunate to have with us 4 industry leaders whose own expertise is helping their companies and the broader industry tackle the issues, both existing and emerging, that we continue to confront related to this pandemic. Please welcome Jeff Guldner, Chairman, President, and CEO of Pinnacle West Capital Corporation, Mike Innocenzo, President and CEO of PECO, John McAvoy, Chairman, President, and CEO of Con Edison, and Maria Pope, President and CEO of Portland General Electric. Well, hey, John, let me get us started. You know, your headquarters is really the epicenter of COVID-19, at least in the United States, and of course that's New York City. And I remember hearing just heartbreaking stories that impacted you and your team personally. It's better days for COVID in New York City now, but what were some of the biggest surprises that you encountered, and just as importantly, what advice would you give us going forward about how we need to think about business continuity planning post-pandemic? What did we learn from this?
Great. Well, thanks, Ben. Appreciate your questions and really happy to share and be part of this conversation. So, you know, the general awareness of coronavirus started for most in early 2020, but it was March 15th, as it happened, the Ides of March, when it became a reality for New York, and in fact, a crisis for New York. That was the day that the mayor announced the New York City school system closing. It was a Sunday, it was announced in the evening, and it was done more than a little bit reluctantly. Everyone recognized was going to be a changing point. So that was March 15th, middle of March. Fast forward to the middle of April, and by that point, in that 1 month, we had 200,000 positive test cases in New York. We'd had 10,000 deaths, 43% of all at that time that had occurred in the U.S. 95% of those were in the Con Ed service territory and Long Island. And neighboring New Jersey and parts of Connecticut had a similar situation. Our employee experience largely mirrored the service territory. We were having 20 to 25 employees test positive each day. And that doesn't include those that had the symptoms, but were just told by their doctor to stay home unless their symptoms get worse. We typically had about 1,000 employees quarantined, and that's out of a workforce of 14,000. And ultimately, and very sadly, 8 members of our team died from COVID. So what did we do? We've had a pandemic team for over a decade. It mobilized in January as the reports of coronavirus started to come out. Having that team was essential. We had a playbook, we had procedures, we had done drills and tabletops, and that team led our response. We also initiated our incident command structure, which we normally use for major events and storms to manage the pandemic. That was a very effective early decision, which benefited us tremendously. In terms of the work, we quickly adopted a number of major approaches. I'll touch on each and give you a little color. So first, social distancing and obsessive hygiene. Split crews, one person in a vehicle, multiple reporting locations. We set up tents in parking lots for malls and parks and ball fields and vacant property, and it worked. We closely tracked the number of employees that had to be quarantined for each employee that tested positive, and it dropped from 20 quarantines early in the crisis down to about 2 or less as we improved. We, like many, started working remotely, working from home. More than half the company quickly transitioned. We went from about 650 people working remotely to over 8,000, 76% of management, 40% of the union. And focusing on the union, we went from 100 union employees working remotely to 2,000 in a little over a week. And I will credit and thank our union leadership. Their teamwork and their collaboration was a tremendous benefit in making the many changes to work rules and collective bargaining agreements that we needed very, very quickly. We focused on reducing the work. We're headed into a crisis where we're not going to have enough hospital beds. We're not going to have enough ventilators. We need to only be doing the essential work. Interestingly, that's easier than it sounds. Our organization, like I think everyone who's represented on this panel, we're built to get work done. Basically, we're a machine whose output is completed work. And we found it was a little hard to turn that machine off, and we really needed to challenge ourselves regarding what was essential. We got to hold our breath for 8 weeks and only focus on that. We eventually did. We implemented a lot of changes in employee benefits. We started paying for parking so that they could avoid mass transit. We increased child care coverage. We eliminated discipline for excessive sick absences, allowed employees to increase vacation carryover, provided additional employee wellness, confidential counseling. We provided legal services to employees at a deep discount, including services, to be morose, services to establish wills and healthcare proxies, living wills. And we allowed employees to make pension elections in advance, including allowing them to cash out their pension, which was not previously available for most. We developed metrics to track progress, to identify hotspots, and to gauge the effectiveness of our action. All that being said, I think the most important thing we did was communicate information with our employees quickly and openly and transparently. We had managers and senior executives, including myself, in the field with employees every day, sharing information and hearing concerns and answering questions. Frankly, sometimes we shared information even we didn't know what it meant or what employees should do, just to ensure that they were getting a full picture. Our intranet site was the information hub. It had daily or more frequent updates, daily cyber messages. We had a 24/7 hotline that people could call with questions, and at least daily we briefed union leaders. And the end result, all of that allowed us really to reinforce teamwork and to help reduce stress and anxiety in what was a very, very difficult situation.
Well, John, you and your team really should be commended for the great job you did. You really were at the epicenter of it. I'm really glad it's better in New York now, and your leadership really shined through during this crisis. So thank you. And one of the things we've all had to do is change our business to adapt to the challenges and some of the opportunities of COVID-19. And Jeff, I thought we could get you to talk a little bit about perhaps specifically the challenges dealing with the regulatory and financial space, and then maybe some of the opportunities that you see to help with the economic recovery associated with COVID-19.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ben. And John, thanks so much for sharing the information. I can tell you that was so important for us in shaping the initial response. And I know that's true for all of my peers. And it was just incredibly helpful to learn from you, and appreciate you sharing all the wisdom with all of us. And so let me start with the regulatory space. This pandemic really required all of us to prioritize differently and be adaptable. And it's not just the companies, it's also our stakeholders and our regulators. And what we saw early on was a lot of conversations with the regulators on how we can support our low-income customers. And that population is now obviously larger. So as we see the economic impacts of the pandemic expand that group, and it's to customers that weren't traditionally qualified. And so a lot of our existing channels were not necessarily set up to help those new customers who are experiencing unemployment for the first time. And so we saw a lot of focus on how can we create really interesting and creative programs using deferral buckets that still had some money in them, using fuel adjusters, but to provide support for those residential customers. And now what's different too is we've got a whole new group of commercial customers, generally small commercial, who are also affected. And so many companies worked with the regulators to adopt regulatory support programs for not just residential, but also for those commercial customers. One of the most important things I think we did as an industry in support, with support of our regulators, was to put in place the Disconnect Moratorium very early on in the pandemic, to just take that immediate pressure off that you're not going to be disconnected in this time of trouble by your electric utility. And I think that what we've seen now is utilities looking at how do we align our customer support programs, how do we think about payment arrangements, and probably more generous payment arrangements than we've seen in the past, so that we can help customers navigate through the moratorium and actually get back into good standing. And that obviously requires working with the regulators. I just want to recognize on the regulatory front the tremendous help and support that Chairman Presley from the Mississippi Commission has done as president of NARUC. And he has been, I think, really instrumental in ensuring that there's good collaboration and information sharing between the utilities and the regulators. And as we're going through that, obviously, this is a really important thing to be focused on. On the financial side, I think we've seen some improvements as we've navigated the pandemic. When it started, I think all of us immediately saw short-term commercial paper dry up. And so that source of kind of immediate liquidity was not available. And it caused many of us to draw our revolving lines of credit. And you want to usually keep those revolvers as a last resort. You don't want to use them if you don't have to. But again, here what we saw was policymakers and the Fed take actions that provided access and opened up that short-term commercial paper market. And I want to thank EEI for their efforts in supporting those actions and making sure we were communicating how important that was to those policymakers. I think since then, many, if not most of us, have been able to effectively access the debt markets, and we're out of our revolvers. And so the liquidity issues are looking better. Equity markets are a little bit different. Usually we see more of a defensive rally when we're in a recessionary environment around utility stocks, but we're all watching those markets as well. And I think this is an area where regulatory support will be important to ensure that we continue to have good access to capital, whether it's debt and equity, on reasonable terms. And it's the thing to always remember there is access to capital on reasonable terms benefits our customers. And that's going to be important longer term as we see increasing investments in clean energy and resilience and the things that we're continuing to invest in as we move forward. Lastly, just a moment on what we've seen with loads. So most of us are getting questions from investors on what are you seeing in terms of trends with load. And I think we've all seen changes with how load's presenting. Most of us, not surprisingly, saw an increase in residential consumption. The lockdown orders went into effect. More customers are working from home. And that comes with a decline in the commercial and industrial demand. And so as those commercial and industrial businesses shut down or the demand decreased, we saw a decline in commercial and industrial load. That's changing as lockdown orders expire. We're starting to see some increase in the C&I load, but we're still seeing more in the home residential customer load. And I think that, as we watch the workplace in the US continue to evolve, some of these trends are likely to continue in some form. And so as the situation stabilizes, I think it's going to give us good long-term opportunities to look more at customer programs about what we can do around peak shaving, load shifting, demand response, and demand management. If you've got more customers at home who can engage in that, who are more interested in creating savings, you've got a great opportunity to help deploy some of these programs and continue to anchor them.
Well, thanks, Jeff. That's probably a great segue to a question I had from Maria, but I just want to, kind of emphasize one of your points that you made is it's when we have a rainy day that the balance sheets, the strong fortress balance sheets, if you will, really play a major role in supporting our communities, and the ability for us to step up and help customers in times of need. And that's made a lot easier when you have a strong balance sheet. And you made that point quite well. Maria, we've all done that outreach and helped our customers manage their bills and their financial crisis through this pandemic. But I think there's other outreach opportunities that are emerging, and how we're using data and technology to connect with customers differently. We're starting to see the acceleration of that through the pandemic, and I'd be really interested in getting your thoughts on how that's going to evolve as we move forward.
Our industry is at our best during challenging times, and these have certainly tested all of us. We immediately moved, as Jeff noted, to suspending disconnects and connecting customers with LIHEAP, state funds, and funds of our own to support customers in need. At CMS Energy, they were a great example in the work that was done to describe disaster loan processes and PPP programs. We heard from Evergy on what it meant to create discounts for customers who were paying their bills after months of arrearages. And DTE was a particularly good example to all of us as they met with hundreds of community organizations, demonstrating the best of what it means to be a utility and an essential service provider during these challenging periods. At Portland General, we've leaned into technology, leveraging capabilities that we didn't have before. Arizona Public Service has been a great example to us in using AI tools and artificial intelligence in serving customers. Our brand new, completely redesigned website and payment systems, where we not only allow customers to use free bank cards, but where they leverage everything from Venmo to Apple Pay to everything in between. Being here for our customers during these challenging times is a hallmark of our industry, and we're using technology, partnerships in a whole new way to achieve great outcomes for customers.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. It is really interesting how technology is changing and how we're using technology and data to improve the customer experience. But I always say that you can't improve the customer experience unless you improve the employee experience as well. And so I think we're using those same sort of technologies, and there's no doubt that the workforce is going to change post-pandemic. And I think we all can't be more proud of the job that all of our employees have done. They've really stepped up, but Mike, it's going to be a little bit different and post-pandemic. And how do we continue to retain and attract these talented employees and a more of diverse workforce? And what do you think the future of work and how does remote work all play into this? What's that future workforce look like in your opinion?
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate the question. I appreciate your leadership on this issue as well as all the other members of the panel. It's interesting, and as you know, under the previous chair, Chris Crane, workforce development's been a focus for Exelon for many years now, not just as an HR function, but as we've tied it in with community outreach, corporate relations, and certainly as part of operations. The programs that we've looked at it have really helped us to highlight that we've got to take a more holistic view of what it means to support our local regions. Keeping the lights on, providing an affordable bill, operating safely. That's sort of the price of admission. We know that we play a bigger role in that in the communities that we serve and providing a meaningful economic impact. So part of that is really also understanding that the communities that we serve haven't shared equally in the economic opportunities that we've had in cities. A lot of our cities that we serve are operating in extreme poverty, and certainly extreme poverty in certain areas of our underserved communities. And the pandemic has only magnified that. Between the pandemic and certainly the focus on racial justice has really just heightened the importance of the work that we're doing around workforce development and making sure that we're providing those opportunities, not just to fill our roles in our companies, but to making sure that we're providing that to communities that can really have their lives changed by jobs in our industry. One of the examples that we do at Xcel and across the EEI, we've been focusing on sort of 3 pillars of this. One is, igniting STEM awareness in young minds. Getting to our kids early, thinking about careers in STEM, and whether they work for our companies or not, getting them to focus on careers in STEM is really important. Identifying and eliminating barriers. In some of the communities, people don't think about jobs in our industry, and there's lots of barriers to entry in our industry, and making sure that we're attacking them, we're identifying them, we're eliminating them, and then making sure that we're equipping both our youth and work-ready adults for jobs in our industry. The jobs and the careers in our industry are family supporting, life-changing careers and great opportunities. At Exelon, we've over the past couple of years, we've hired more than 700 people, both internally and externally, and I think that's important as well too. I think as our industry, it's important that we collaborate with our vendor partners, with some of the adjacent industries, to making sure that we're also providing these opportunities. We want them to work for our companies, but also work for those companies that are close to us. We focused on things like infrastructure academies. Across Exelon, we've got one in each of our major cities. At BGE, we've got our workforce collaborative. At ComEd, we've got our Construct program. At PECO, we've got our Smart Energy technical training program. And at PHI, we've got our DC Infrastructure Academy. The key is really to making sure that we're sort of cradle to grave, that we're getting to kids at middle school, high school, through college, as well as work-ready adults, and really trying to change outcomes, economic outcomes, by focusing on a lifelong focus on development. As you mentioned, and as all of our panelists have mentioned, COVID's been a challenge, right? So it's really changed how we have to think and how we have to operate. There's certain things, kind of right off the bat, is just remaining committed to continue to provide those opportunities, whether it was through interns working remotely, whether it's reaching out to community partners and understand how they've been impacted by the COVID pandemic and helping to do what we can to support our operations. As mentioned earlier, all of our workforce is working very differently now. And at Exelon, 45% of our workforce is working on a virtual platform. So not only how do we get our work done every day, but how do we continue to attract, as you mentioned, attract and retain talent becomes a little bit more challenging. Conducting interviews remotely, onboarding people remotely, training in some cases, sometimes in person, social distancing, sometimes remotely, but really making sure that not only are we continuing to engage and attract employees, but also making sure that there's a culture that they want to stay. And then also recognizing that it's important that not only is it around development and attracting talent, but there's a commitment to the community. One example we had is our high school internship program was really in jeopardy because we couldn't bring the kids. But recognizing that it's more than just jobs and job development. In some cases, we may be the only form of income for some of these high school students, and we needed to make sure that we continue to maintain those commitments. So we partnered with the Philadelphia Youth Network and found out a way to host a virtual platform. Going forward, I think, and I probably speak for many of us on this panel, it's been an extreme challenge, but in some ways, I think we've advanced the ball beyond where we would have been had we not been faced with the crisis. In a lot of cases, we've learned to become more efficient, we've learned to become more innovative, and we've learned to develop more effective processes. Whether it's doing storm work from remote locations, whether it's doing remote equipment certifications and inspection processes, making sure that we're continuing to evaluate all the work we do and find a way to do it differently and safer, in a way that might be much more efficient. And I think in many ways, I think when this is all said and done, when we get through this together, which we will, we'll find out that COVID has not been a setback, but really a launching point to the future of our industry.
Well, thanks, Mike. Yeah, there's nothing like a Zoom or a Teams call to the decision process and make a meeting go quicker, is it?
Goes quick.
But I really want to thank you. I want to thank Chris Crane, Exelon, and PECO for just really the leadership you've displayed through the years. And just so everybody on the audience knows, we will be discussing best practices and what we can all do to step up our game for diversity and inclusion, and making sure that everybody has a fair opportunity. Because, one of the things I say, Mike, is that we're literally embedded in the community. Our assets aren't where, and the health of our companies is really a reflection of the health of our communities. So thanks for the great work you're doing. I really appreciate it, and more to come. Hey, John, let's pivot back to you. Even before the pandemic began, you've been a leader in coordinating resiliency, working with the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. Love to get your perspective on what the ESCC, what the council did during the pandemic response, and if you could give any advice, the one thing that perhaps you'd want from the government if we had a future pandemic, your thoughts would be most appreciated.
Great, thanks, Ben. Yeah, so the ESCC is just such a powerful force for good. We always find it to be so valuable, and we benefit from the group's ideas and insights. We have the multiple industry groups. We have broad representation of all different types of utilities from across North America, and we have our government partners there that really have been so committed and so impressive in terms of their support for our industry and their responsiveness when we have issues. And certainly the COVID experience in participating on the ESCC has been no different. We were able to share the impacts that we were seeing in real time, given that we were on the early edge of the crisis. But the group helped us focus, and I think many others in the industry focus on many of the kind of generic issues. First, there was the issue of increased cyber threat. So many people working from home, increased potential for dial-in access. Basically, we've expanded our perimeter. Plus, we know that those who wish us ill will take moments of other crisis to then take advantage of the potential to interrupt us from a cyber perspective. We highlighted and addressed a lot of supply chain limitations. As simple as masks and PPE that we know was not simple in the crisis, the more complex issues where the availability really in an unexpected way was not there. And we certainly used the ESCC to share best practices and help those from across the country in North America learn from each other so that we weren't each on our own learning curve. So going forward, maybe a few thoughts that might be beneficial if the ESCC can have a further role. One is when we look at essential workers and how do you go about prioritizing them in a fair way, representing the needs of all of the communities and societies, but prioritizing them for testing at times. And maybe even as vaccine distribution, as vaccines become available and there's a distribution approach, realizing that there are some sets, and we'll likely keep it to a small subset, control center employees and the like, where we really might want to prioritize the accessibility of testing and vaccine distribution to them. And another case that where there have been challenges is individual states have limitations. And while you're working within the state, that's one level of complexity, but it also has the potential to negatively impact mutual aid, border crossings and the like. And to the extent that working with our government partners, we can come up with the best way to approach those and still maximize what has been a very important, basically essential mutual aid process for our sector, still remains effective and intact.
John, those are really excellent points, and sometimes they get lost in the crisis. So I want to thank you for that. You've been on the front lines and leading this as we worked hard to make sure that our frontline employees were considered essential workers. So thanks a lot for that. And obviously the work you're doing to make sure the lights stay on and we don't have the bad guys take down the grid. And while that work continues, of course, our customers still are interested in getting greener. There's been an uptick in interest in green tariff programs, sustainable programs. Maria, I'll go back to you. What are some of the new ways that you're working with and the industry's working with customers to help them achieve their sustainability goals?
Sure. It's interesting during periods of crisis, I think leaders and successful companies sort of double down on their focus. And there's no question that customers, large and small, want a clean energy future. And I think your company, Ben, Jeff, and Arizona Public Service have been leaders in 100% clean energy goals. But as we look to what customers are looking for, they're looking toward their energy mix. And whether they're driven by the IPCC's call to action, whether they're driven by natural disasters and wildfires that we've seen in the West, or they just appreciate the clean skies that we have all seen in the last 6 months. There's absolutely a focus on 100% green energy for some of our largest customers. And for us at Portland General, where we have the largest voluntary renewable program with about a quarter of our customers voluntarily buying green energy, it's really interesting to see the acceleration. One of the things that we have is a green energy tariff sold out in a matter of minutes at 160 megawatts, and we're now more than doubling that size, working with individual tech companies, large-scale digital companies, as well as many others for the next generation of that program. I would also say in Florida, FPL has over 1,000 megawatt solar Together program, which is exceptional in that they are not requiring long-term commitments, but rather month-to-month enrollment. And what has made all of this possible is the lower cost of renewable energy that we are now seeing across all of our marketplaces, as well as the ability to integrate through battery technology, pump storage, and work together collectively across markets in the West and across the country. So there's no question that customers are demanding more. As the head of Microsoft's energy area said to me just the other day, we've got to have moonshot objectives and be able to achieve them.
Yeah, that's great. Well, listen, I know we're starting to get short of time and there's plenty of questions I can continue to ask you. John hit upon some of the practices that were put in place to keep our workers safe. Mike, maybe, and we can go around the horn, but be curious what you think the best practices post-pandemic might be, that things that we might keep with us as we get through through COVID and hopefully see the end of COVID.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Ben. I think it's a great question. And I think as John laid out really well, all of those best practices kind of during COVID are certainly something that's most important. But at some point in time, we're going to get through this, and we'll never lose sight of the fact that for all of us in our industry, our most sacred commitment is the safety of our employees and our communities. And certainly the risks that exist in our industry prior to COVID are going to exist after, and we really need to rethink and reassess how we focus on worker safety, even beyond COVID. One of the areas that I think is will always be most important will be to engage in employees, whether it's through the COVID crisis or post. Nobody knows what it means to be safe, and nobody knows the risks that they encounter more so than our workforce that's doing this day in and day out. So making sure that we've got processes and kind of a protocol for where we're continually engaging with our frontline workers, with our union leadership, making sure that we're addressing their concerns, making sure that we're listening and engaging them and involving them in the process. One of the areas I think that's gotten a lot of heightened focus lately, and I think it's an important one, is the focus on injury potential. We've all kind of operated under the safety pyramid, where the belief is that if we focus on the little things, we'll stop the serious injuries and fatalities. And unfortunately, I think we've all come across the realization that that's just not enough, and that you really need to focus on both of those separately. EEI has been a real leader in this area, focusing on safety classification and the learning model, and it's really kind of a simple focus, and it's a recognition that serious injuries and fatalities, or potential serious injuries and fatalities, are not always you can always address them by just addressing little things, but you need to focus separately on those events where you have energy levels or energy present in a situation that could lead to a severe injury or fatality, whether it be a car accident, whether it be a situation of stored energy. And unfortunately for those events, fortunately for those events in terms of the outcomes, unfortunately from our learning, they're infrequent. They don't occur as often as the day-to-day outages. And so one of the things that the EEI is focusing on is using this safety classification and learning model to help us report those injuries, report those potential situations, share the learnings, share the events, and try to collectively work together so that we can avoid them in the future. I think one of the things that's a hallmark of our industry is, not only do we share resources, we share learnings, and we realize that, if one of us isn't safe, we're all not safe. And that is, we continue to share among that as an industry, continue to learn from that as an industry. We're better when we're all safer and we're all stronger.
Well said, well said.
Awesome.
Listen, we are out of time. Maybe just 10 seconds for the panelists that haven't spoke. Any words of wisdom on how we ought to be thinking about the pandemic or our strategies going forward, Jeff?
Yeah, Ben, just to build on Mike's, it's safety is a key important thing, and particularly if you've got a lot of people working remote, but we also recognize this is impacting the workforce no matter how it plays out. And so focusing also on how do we team effectively in a remote environment, because that's likely to continue. And then how do we watch for mental and emotional health when we're not seeing those employees every day? How do we really make sure that we're focused on mental and emotional well-being?
That's a great point. John, anything to add?
I'll tell you, Ben, there were so many unexpected twists in this crisis. One that we saw was that when employees returned to work after testing positive and recuperating, they brought an optimism and a hope and a strength that was uplifting to their coworkers. And going beyond that, our employees' determination and their resolve was completely evident throughout this crisis. They weren't naive about the threats we were facing, but they were strong and professional, committed and caring. And I will tell you, I could not be more proud.
No, also well said. Maria, we'll let you close it out for just any final quick thought.
Our industry comes together during tough times and is there for our customers and the communities we serve. The collaboration, the camaraderie, and being there for one another serving customers is a hallmark of our industry. And this year is a great example of the best of what we do. Thank you.
Well, thanks. And listen, thanks. This has been a terrific panel discussion, terrific panelists. And I think you can hear the virtual applause in the background now. So I want to thank all of you, and thanks for doing this. I think everybody benefited from your wisdom. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.